On the afternoon of July 12th, 2026, the temperature in Salt Lake City, Utah, climbed to 109 degrees Fahrenheit. That number might not sound world-ending until you learn that the city has been keeping temperature records since 1874, and in those 152 years, through every Dust Bowl summer and every heat wave anyone had ever lived through, it had never once been that hot. Not ever. The same afternoon, a few hundred miles to the north, Billings, Montana, hit 111 degrees, among the hottest readings ever taken there, and a town nearby reached 115. These were not the ordinary records you hear about on the news, the hottest it's ever been on a particular date. These were all time records, the single hottest temperatures those places had ever measured in their entire recorded history, and they were falling, one after another, across the American West in a single summer. This is the story of that summer, the summer of 2026, which has become, across the United States, a summer of broken all-time heat records, and of the bigger question hiding underneath it, not just how hot it got, but why the very hardest temperature records to break, the all-time ones, are suddenly falling at all, because that is the part that actually means something. But let me be clear and precise about what is happening right now, because precision is the whole point of a channel like this. As of this week, late in July 2026, a dangerous heat wave is once again baking parts of the country. Extreme heat warnings are posted across the desert Southwest, around Phoenix and Yuma, and across a broad stretch of the central states, Missouri and its neighbors, where high temperatures combined with heavy humidity are driving the feels like numbers into genuinely dangerous territory. That heat is real, and it is dangerous, and if you are living under it right now, you should take it seriously. But I want to be straight with you. This week's heat, serious as it is not the historic part. The truly extraordinary all-time records I just described fell earlier this month, in the first half of July. So this is not a video screaming that your city will break its all-time record tomorrow. It is something more useful. An honest look at a summer that has rewritten the record books across America, and at why it keeps happening. Let me start with a distinction that almost nobody thinks about, because it is the key that unlocks this entire story. When you hear that a city broke a heat record, it almost always means a daily record. The hottest it has ever been on that specific calendar date. The hottest July 12th ever, say daily records, are frankly not that rare. Every city has 365 of them, one for each day of the year, and in any good hot stretch, dozens of them tumble across the country. They make the news, but they happen constantly. A step up from that is the monthly record, the hottest it has ever been in the entire month of July, for example. Those fall less often, and they mean more. But at the very top of the pyramid sits the rarest and most meaningful record of all, the all-time record. That is the single hottest temperature a place has ever recorded, on any day, in any month, across the whole span of its history, often a century or more of measurements. An all-time record is, almost by definition, supposed to essentially never break, because to break it, the weather has to beat every single hot day that location has ever experienced, going back generations. When an all-time record falls, it is a genuinely rare and genuinely significant event. And in the summer of 2026, they have been falling across the United States like dominoes. Let me give you the real tally, because it is remarkable, and every figure here comes from the National Weather Service and the reporting around it. Salt Lake City, as I said, reached 109 degrees on July 12th, its hottest temperature in 152 years of records, breaking a previous all-time mark of 107. Billings, Montana, hit 111 degrees the same day, a reading counted as an all-time record for the city, and nearby Miles City soared to 115, out in the deserts where the heat is always punishing. The extremes reached almost incomprehensible levels. Palm Springs, California, hit 124 degrees on July 5th, an all-time record for the city. Death Valley touched 129 degrees on July 7th, brushing against the highest temperature ever reliably measured anywhere on the surface of the Earth, and Las Vegas endured 5 straight days at or above 115 degrees, closing in on its own all-time record of 120. a mark that itself had only been set 2 years earlier in 2024. And this was not confined to the West. Across the first half of July, more than 100 million Americans, roughly a third of the entire country, found themselves under dangerous heat at one point or another, stretching from the Southwest all the way to the Northeast, with New York, Philadelphia, and Washington sweltering under heat index values near or above 100 degrees. The National Weather Service, in its own forecasts, took the unusual step of calling the heat exceptionally rare and warning that it could approach monthly and even all-time records, extraordinary language for a government agency that is trained to be measured and cautious. That is what a summer of all-time records looks like. Not a single freak afternoon, but a whole season of them, city after city, from the Mojave to Montana to Manhattan. So how does this actually happen? The immediate cause of a heat wave like this has a name you have almost certainly heard by now: a heat dome. And it is worth understanding what that phrase really describes, because it is not just a poetic way of saying it's hot. A heat dome is a vast, stubborn region of high pressure in the atmosphere that parks itself over a large area, sometimes spanning several states, and behaves in effect like a lid clamped over the landscape. High pressure forces air to sink, and as that air sinks, it compresses, and compressing air heats up. At the same time, the dome suppresses clouds and calms the wind, so there is nothing to block the sun and nothing to stir the air. Day after day, the sun bakes the ground with no interruption, and the lid holds all that accumulating heat in place. And because these domes are so persistent, they can sit for a week or two at a time. The heat does not simply spike and then break. It compounds. Each day starts hotter than the one before, because the ground and the air never fully cool overnight, so the next day's heating begins from an already elevated floor. This is why heat waves are defined as much by how long they last as by how hot they get. A single 105-degree afternoon is dangerous. A heat dome that holds 105 degrees for 10 days straight, with nights that never drop into comfortable range, is deadly, because the human body and the power grid and the whole system never get the chance to recover. In fact, one of the most alarming features of this summer's heat was not the daytime peaks at all, but the nights. Alongside the daytime records, forecasters tracked hundreds of record-warm overnight lows, nights that simply refused to cool down. And it is the failure of the night to cool that turns a heat wave into a killer. It is worth stepping back to see the rhythm of this entire summer, because no single heat wave tells the story, the repetition does. The 2026 season has not been one heat dome, it has been a procession of them. A brutal dome settled over the eastern and central states around the 4th of July, sending heat indices past 100 from the Midwest to the East Coast, and putting tens of millions under warnings during the holiday. That one had barely relaxed when the truly historic Western episode built in the second week of July, the one that toppled all-time records from Utah to Montana to the California desert. And now, in the final days of the month, yet another dome has set up, baking the Southwest and the central states with the dangerous heat that is prompting warnings as these very words are written. 3 major heat waves, essentially back-to-back, across a single American summer. Any one of them in isolation would be an ordinary if unpleasant feature of July. It is the fact that they keep coming, one after another, each building on a hotter baseline than the last, that separates a normal summer from the kind of summer that rewrites the record books. The domes are the weather. The relentless procession of them is the climate. But here is the thing a heat dome cannot explain on its own. Heat domes have always formed. They are a normal feature of summer weather. So why are all time records, records that stood for 100 years or more, suddenly toppling all over the country in a single season? For that, you cannot look at the weather. You have to look at the baseline. And this is the most important idea in the whole video, so let me lay it out carefully, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Picture the full range of possible summer temperatures for a city as a bell curve. Most days pile up in the middle, around average. The rare extremes, the unusually cool days and the unusually hot days, sit out at the thin edges, and the all-time record sits way out at the far hot end, at the very edge of what has ever been possible. Now, here is what climate change actually does. It does not simply sprinkle in a freak hot day now and then. It takes that entire bell curve and shifts it, the whole thing, toward the hot end. The average days get warmer, the cool days get warmer, and, critically, the hot extreme end gets warmer too. The entire distribution slides. And when you slide the whole curve, something dramatic happens out at the edges. Temperatures that used to sit at the absolute limit of what was possible become merely very hot and ordinary. And new extremes, values that were essentially off the old chart, that the historical record never contained, suddenly become reachable. Every heat dome now builds on top of a starting point that is already warmer than it used to be. So the exact same weather pattern that might have produced a 105-degree day 40 years ago now produces a 109. The dome is the same. The foundation it is standing on is higher. That is why the all-time records, the hardest records in the entire system to break, are the ones now falling. Not because any single day is beyond imagination, but because the whole climate has shifted underneath our cities, quietly pushing the extremes into territory the record books were never built to hold. Scientists who study this have found that global warming is driving long-term increases in both the frequency and the strength of extreme heat events. And the run of all-time records across the United States in 2026 is precisely what that finding looks like when it stops being a graph in a journal and starts being a thermometer in your backyard. On top of that long-term trend, this particular year has an extra amplifier, a strong El Niño pattern in the Pacific, which nudges global temperatures even higher, stacking an unusually warm year on top of an already warming climate. The result is a summer engineered, almost perfectly, to break records that were supposed to last forever. There is one more piece of evidence for this shifting baseline, and it is beautifully simple, because it sidesteps all the argument and just counts. In a climate that was genuinely stable, not warming, not cooling, you would expect, over the long run, to see roughly as many record high temperatures set as record low temperatures. New heat records and new cold records should come in at about 1-to-1, balancing out over the years like flips of a fair coin. That is what a stable climate looks like in the record books. But that is not what the United States has been seeing. For decades now, record daily highs have been outpacing record daily lows by a ratio of roughly 2-to-1, and in the hottest years. By far more than that. The coin, in other words, is no longer fair. It is weighted toward heat, and the weighting is increasing. You do not need to understand atmospheric physics to grasp what a 2-to-1 imbalance in record highs versus record lows means. It means the warm end of the scale is winning, systematically, year after year. The all-time records falling this summer are simply the most dramatic expression of a trend that the humble daily tally has been quietly recording for a generation. And this matters far, far beyond the record books, because of a fact that surprises most people. Heat is the deadliest form of extreme weather there is. In a typical year in the United States, heat kills more people than hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. It just does it quietly. There is no dramatic footage of a heat death. No roof torn off, no river bursting its banks, just a body, often an older person, alone in an apartment without air conditioning, whose heart or whose organs finally could not keep up. Heat kills through heat stroke, and by pushing already strained hearts and lungs past their breaking point. And it falls hardest on the most vulnerable among us, the elderly, the very young, outdoor workers, people who cannot afford to run an air conditioner, and the homeless. And here is the cruelest twist in the whole story, the one that ties directly back to those all-time records. The danger is often worst, precisely where the records are being broken, because those are the places least prepared for it. A 109-degree day in Salt Lake City is far more dangerous, person for person, than a routine 115-degree day in Phoenix. Why? Because Phoenix is built for extreme heat. The homes have powerful air conditioning. The infrastructure is designed around it. The people know how to cope. The cooling centers are established. Salt Lake City, a place built for cooler mountain summers, is not. Many homes there were never designed to shed that kind of heat. many people have no experience with it and no equipment for it. Records, by their nature, fall hardest in the places where such heat has never happened before, and those are exactly the places where the people are least ready, and where the heat does the most harm. To see just how lethal this can be, you need only look across the Atlantic. During a recent stretch of record-breaking heat in Europe, French officials estimated the country suffered around 1,000 excess deaths. Heat that breaks records breaks bodies. There is a piece of physiology worth understanding here, because it explains why the humid heat gripping the central states this week can be every bit as dangerous as the dry, triple-digit heat of the desert, and sometimes more so. Your body has essentially one way to cool itself when the air is hotter than you are: sweating. As sweat evaporates off your skin, it carries heat away, and that evaporation is the entire mechanism keeping you alive on a hot day. But evaporation only works if the surrounding air is dry enough to accept the moisture. When the humidity is very high, as it is across Missouri and the central states right now, the air is already so saturated with water that your sweat cannot evaporate efficiently. It just sits on your skin, and your body's one cooling system quietly fails. This is why forecasters talk about the heat index, or the feels like temperature. A 100-degree day at high humidity stresses the body far more than a 100-degree day in the dry desert, because in the humid version, you cannot cool down. Scientists even describe a theoretical hard limit, a combination of heat and humidity beyond which no amount of sweating can save you. A point at which a perfectly healthy person, sitting in the shade with plenty of water, will still overheat and die within hours. We rarely reach that absolute limit, but here is the sobering part. The overwhelming majority of heat deaths happen well below it, in conditions that look survivable on paper. You do not need a record-shattering temperature to die of heat. You just need enough of it, for long enough, with nights that will not cool and air too wet to sweat into. So why does it keep happening, summer after summer, and where is this going? The honest answer is not a comforting one. As long as the baseline keeps warming, every summer loads the dice a little further toward extreme heat. And the all-time records that feel shocking this year will quietly become the ordinary hot days of a decade or two from now. The heat domes themselves will keep forming and dissolving. That is just weather, and always will be. But every one of them now builds on a hotter foundation than the last, which means more and more of them will reach up into record territory. This summer's all-time records are not a ceiling that we have finally hit. They are a waypoint that we are passing. And the cities that will keep getting blindsided are the ones I described. The historically cooler, higher latitude, northern places whose homes and power grids and populations were simply never designed for the temperatures that are now, increasingly, arriving. Let me end with honesty and balance, because a subject like this deserves clarity and not panic. Heat waves are natural. Summer is supposed to be hot, and the United States has always had ferocious summers. A single scorching week, including the dangerous one gripping parts of the country right now, is weather, and weather alone proves nothing. Humans are also genuinely adaptable, better warning systems, more cooling centers, checking on elderly neighbors, and simple public awareness save real lives every single summer, and many cities are getting meaningfully better at protecting people. The point of all this is emphatically not that summer has become unlivable or that the end is near. The point is narrower and sharper than that. It is that the rarest, most meaningful thing a thermometer can tell us, the all-time record, the hottest a place has ever been across its entire recorded history, has stopped behaving like a once-in-a-generation event and started arriving in clusters, several in a single summer, spread across an entire country. One hot day is noise. An all-time record is signal. And a whole summer of them, coast to coast, is the signal getting harder and harder to ignore. So, as of this week, late in July of 2026, the heat is still on across parts of America. The Southwest is baking, the central states are under extreme heat warnings, and millions of people are once again being told to stay indoors, stay hydrated, and check on the people around them. That heat is real and dangerous, and it deserves respect today, wherever you are. But the deeper story of this summer was never going to be found in any single week. It is in the tally of records that have already fallen. Salt Lake City's hottest day in 152 years, an all-time high in Palm Springs, records toppling from the mountains of Montana to the floor of the Mojave, marks that were supposed to stand for generations. Falling within a few weeks of one another. A daily record tells you that yesterday was a hot day. An all-time record tells you that something underneath has changed. And in the summer of 2026, across the United States, the all-time records have been falling like never before, which is simply the sky's way of telling us, in the plainest and least arguable numbers it has, that the climate we quietly built our cities and our lives on top of is shifting, steadily, beneath our feet.